If you've been paying attention, you've probably been hearing a lot of talk about climate change and carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, global warming. An environmental crisis caused by humans threatens our very existence on this planet. But with so much seemingly out of our control as individuals, how much can we help to make a difference? Well, there are two parts of our everyday lifestyles that have big roles to play in the fight against climate change. Climate change is a complex scientific subject which spans many different areas. Some parts of the puzzle are natural. The greenhouse effect, for example, occurs when naturally occurring gases in the atmosphere trap heat from the surface to maintain the Earth's temperature. But too many greenhouse gases, the excess caused by human activity, increases global temperature, hence the phrase global warming. To give you an idea of the difference between naturally occurring and human activity-produced greenhouse gases, experts have calculated that the Earth has warmed more over the last 100 to 150 years following the start of the Industrial Revolution than it did in the previous 1,000. So how can we tackle climate change? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the voice of thousands of scientists and experts around the world, presented world leaders with an essential target in 2018. One they believe is a minimum to mitigate the environmental and social consequences of a warming climate.
Climate impacts now and in the future increasingly challenge the adaptive capacity of society and ecosystems. And as a result, the Sustainable Development Goals such as zero poverty, zero hunger, and life on Earth will be compromised.
That target being to limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade, with the world needing to reduce emissions by an estimated 7.6% annually by 2030 before reaching a point of no return. Now that's only 10 years away. And to give us an idea of what a 7.6% drop in carbon emissions looks like, the Global Carbon Project estimates that in reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic and corresponding lockdown in much of the world, emissions in 2020 could be down 7%. That's 0.6% short of the target annual reduction without a global shutdown.
We are clearly in a crisis.
So at this point, you might be asking why, with all this knowledge in hand, everything humanly possible isn't being done to reach this target. Well, the truth is, the antagonists in this story, the processes that cause most of the human-made damage, are so heavily integrated into global economy and society that making the changes needed and at the speed they're required is an extremely challenging and disruptive task to civilization as we know it. But with the consequences of inaction being far more severe, disruptive consequences call for disruptive change. But what can we be doing to play our part? To get an idea, let's look at two everyday activities and the impacts of the life cycle and industries associated with them: the food we eat and the cars we drive. Food and the systems around their production and transportation contribute between 21 and 37% of all global greenhouse emissions every year, contributing significantly to deforestation and biodiversity loss too, a further detrimental factor in the fight against climate change. A shocking example of how a single food sector can impact climate change comes with the farming of livestock. If you break down what makes up those annual food-related emissions, you'll see livestock contributes nearly 65% of agriculture's greenhouse gases and 78% of its methane emissions. This is due mainly to the amount of cropland that's needed not just for the animals themselves, but for the food grown to feed them. The two together take up more than 80% of global farmland, yet produce less than 20% of the world's supply of calories. The livestock sector is also one of the key drivers of land use change. 13 billion hectares of forest area are lost due to land conversion for both food and livestock feed crop production every year. And these are forests that help pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and mitigate climate change. With a growing population to feed and agricultural yield under threat as a result of a warming planet, if the world is to make an impact on the climate crisis, the food system needs to be radically reshaped to be more efficient and sustainable. And one way that us as individuals can help that to happen is with our food choices. From reducing the amount of meat in our diets and using our power as consumers to steer the industry into a more sustainable direction, to being more aware of the carbon footprint of the food we buy, opting for more local, seasonal produce made using sustainable practices.
Agriculture has the potential not just to mitigate its impact on the climate, but to actually help roll back a significant portion of the impact all of us in all sectors have had on the climate.
Completing the life cycle, a fundamental part in the sustainability of the food system is waste. Currently, around a third of the food produced in the world annually for human consumption, approximately 1.3 billion tons, ends up lost or wasted. That waste is found across the life cycle of the food we eat. In developing countries, it's found in the earlier stages with poor harvests, supply chain and infrastructure issues, but in medium to high income countries, the behaviour of consumers plays a much bigger part in food waste. Producing, buying and eating more than we need, and in turn, throwing away more. Cars are an essential part of the modern day lifestyle, with the automotive industry contributing significantly to the global economy. But for more than a few decades, it's been known that the emissions from transport aren't helping us in the battle against climate change. In the UK and in the US, transportation is responsible for emitting more greenhouse gases than any other sector, including agriculture and electricity production. Globally, transport makes up close to a quarter of all CO2 emissions. With the climate change target set and the consequences of not reaching them known, big shifts in the automotive industry are being made to lessen the impact of private cars. An electric revolution has begun, but how much of a difference can that make? A study from the University of Cambridge published earlier this year stated that driving an electric car is better for the climate than conventional petrol and diesel cars in 95% of the world, with average lifetime emissions up to 70% lower than fossil fuel powered cars. Studies and information like this are impacting major policy throughout the world. In Europe, legislation has been set to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars in some countries as early as 2035. The automotive industry is following suit, and it's never been more exciting to change our driving habits and help save the planet at the same time. The last 5 years has seen a 565% global increase in electric cars on the road, and according to analysis, by 2025, EVs will make up 22% of the vehicles produced in the EU, and close to 50% come 2030. Battery range and performance is constantly improving too, meaning a lot of the common concerns associated with ditching your combustion engine are a thing of the past. As the adoption of electric cars grows, the contribution to global carbon emissions lowers, and as energy sources become more renewable in line with climate targets, electric car emissions will keep getting lower. Meaning that if you bought an electric car tomorrow, it would be getting more efficient and more carbon friendly every day. Electric vehicles offer a far greater use at the end of their lives than combustion engine vehicles too, with batteries able to be repurposed for second lives, storing electricity for our houses and commercial use, or recycled down for use in new batteries, playing a further role in the reduction of carbon emissions with a more sustainable life cycle. Hydrogen is an alternative fuel source that offers potential for future clean transport. Fuel cells in the vehicle combine hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity that powers an electric motor. Currently, hydrogen is mostly produced from natural gas, a non-renewable, unsustainable natural resource that generates significant carbon emissions. Green hydrogen, however, can be produced via the electrolysis of water using renewable energy, with water vapour being the only exhaust emission. The climate crisis is real and presents a huge challenge for us to overcome. Human activity created this global issue, and only smarter, sustainable and more carbon-positive human activity will limit its consequences. The world looks to its leaders for more guidance and incentives in this fight, but much of the awareness and innovation will come from everyday life and culture. Formula E is a prime example of this, by creating the platform for a sustainable motorsport and providing the space for intense data gathering, efficiency and performance improvements for electric cars, while simultaneously providing action-packed racing and entertainment for millions all over the world. Motorsport is once again serving a fundamental purpose in consumer culture, a place for some of the world's biggest manufacturers to showcase their advancements in electric car tech and woo over potential customers. Having major players invest heavily in cleaner technology, creating the cars consumers want to drive, and making pledges to be completely carbon neutral is a huge step in the right direction, influenced both by policy and culture. more industries, including the agricultural industry, follow suit for carbon neutrality alongside adopting a more circular economy in the next few years, that 1.5 degree target will become more achievable, and the terrifying consequences of further global warming don't need to become a reality.